The Coach Curl podcast is brought to you by Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul, I see you. Finish on. Coach Curl.
Great job, guys.
Good morning. Today is the 3rd of April, and if you're anywhere in the world at that particular time, 3rd of April 2020, you are in the midst of this COVID-19 and pandemic, or whatever it is that they're calling it now. Let's call it a crisis and let's be done with that. So, and what I've seen here in Australia, I'm from Brisbane, Australia, what I've seen is we're seeing an influx of sentiment around Australian-made products, which is fantastic. And we're seeing this rising tide of sentiment during this COVID-19 crisis. Now, I've been invited as a business coach, as a leadership coach, into a number of those different groups, promoting and speaking about encouraging people to buy Aussie-made. And I applaud them for the sentiment. And in one of those groups, there's over 1.3 million people. Fantastic. Which is a fantastic size group for a country of our size. We've got 26 million people here in Australia. And some of the commentary, however, is based more on the desire to punish China, who are the source of COVID-19. As opposed to any real sentiment about buying Aussie-made products. It's about punishing China. Now, I shared some of the thoughts around this on episode 66 of the Dumb Leaders podcast, and you can also see that on my YouTube feed, in which I share that the world really does need to stand up to some of those practices that created the virus, those wildlife markets that we see in China, are quite honestly barbaric and really need to change and modify. We are living in a modern world. So I speak about that in episode 66. So please check it out. Dumbleaders.com is another place where you can hear that episode. So there are some things as a global community that need to change. But today's focus is on Aussie made. And in these groups, we're seeing a lot of products being promoted. They're niche products, they're niche manufacturing. In some cases, they're simply a hobbyist, someone that is, potentially making some handmade candles or something at home. And, I really encourage people to support those particular businesses and those particular industries. But I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but that won't save the country, right? That will not save Australia. And here are some simple facts, right? Some simple facts that we need to digest. And we all know these facts, right? Try and buy an Australian-made car. It's impossible. Try and buy a TV that's made in Australia. It's impossible. I would say, I don't want to say impossible, but it's pretty close to impossible. We used to have a really good manufacturing industry around electronics. We'd have Philips, we'd have Pi. There are a number of different Aussie-made brands that are no longer. We've got a couple of different Australian-made computer manufacturers, mostly within their own like companies or franchise. We don't see many of the big names made in Australia. But the other thing that we have there is most of those parts are coming in from overseas. Try and buy a smartphone that's made in Australia. Now, I know that there's a company called Mint that is making an Australian-made smartphone. Mint doesn't necessarily have the same appeal as the Samsung or the iPhone, So congratulations to Mint for taking that punt. I really hope you do gain some momentum. And, try and buy a tool that's made in Australia. Especially a tool in one of our larger big box hardware stores that is made in Australia. See, the problem is we no longer have a manufacturing base that's going to save our country. And we can no longer look after our own. We are so reliant on offshore manufacturing purely to maintain our consumer standard of living. That's our reality. Purely to maintain our consumer standard of living. Now, in February, I was in Japan. I was due to be running the Tokyo Marathon, and of course that was cancelled because of COVID-19. But one of the things due to travel insurances not really being part of a consumer-friendly world and, not being covered for things like pandemic breakouts, we still went. We had a really fantastic time there in Japan. And, some of the things that we saw in Japan and how they were stopping the spread of COVID-19 in a country of 126 odd million people was really eye-opening based on the laissez-faire attitude that I saw back in our own country. But one of the things initially that really caught my eye, the drive from the airport. So the airport was Narita Airport, and that's about a 1.5 hour drive to where we were staying in Shinjuku. And what caught my eye really early was the amount of Japanese cars on the road, right? I didn't see Hyundais, I didn't see Korean cars, I didn't see Kias. I saw Japanese cars, Mazdas, Toyotas, Suzukis. So I saw those, and it was really evident that Japanese-made cars were the main drivers on the road. And, I also saw another thing I found interesting, which you may find interesting. I saw a couple of different style of left-hand drive or right-hand drive cars. So the Japanese drive on the left-hand side of the road, but they've got no qualms with allowing you to have a car that's built for the right-hand side of the road, driving on the road. So I found that fascinating as well. Just for some relevance here, the Japanese car market in 2017, there were 4.3 million cars sold, of which 80% were local. 80% local. Now, they import 350,000 cars a year. So 4.3 is being sold and they're importing 350,000. The interesting thing is that those cars are being imported they're not influenced on price. They're not influenced on the cost. They're influenced on drivers' taste and trend. So therefore, what you see in Japan, you will see BMWs, you'll see Mercedes-Benz, you'll see Volkswagens as the imported cars. But you predominantly see Japanese cars. So really interesting. And when you look at the Japanese brands, the top 5 brands, Toyota, Honda, Suzuki, Daihatsu, and Nissan, right? So, and the interesting other thing is that they roughly export about roughly the size of their own market. So it's about 4.3. They export about the same. So when you think about that, a country of 126 million, they've got 4.3 million car sales every year, of which 80% is local manufacture. And the only cars that are being exported are due to high-end European brands, the BMWs, the Mercedes, and the VWs. So really interesting. Now, when you think about our market size here in Australia for cars, like we've got a population around 26 million. We sell about 1 million cars a year. And we'd like to believe that it's dipped, but whether it has or not, based on 2019 figures, we still sold about 1 million in cars. Relative in size in terms of population to Japan. The difference is they've got a strong manufacturing sector, they've got a strong belief, and they've got a strong pride in Japanese-made products. Whereas here in Australia, we succumb to the cheap is best scenario. We want the best of everything for as little as what we can pay. And just for transparency, my last Australian car was a Falcon in 2002. So I've been driving Hyundais ever since. So I'm definitely part of the problem. So I'm not sitting here from a sermon. I'm not sitting here on a pulpit saying we must do this, because I'm part of the problem. Because the first step is that we need to acknowledge that we do have a problem. And I'm certainly for part of it. So how does this get fixed, right? And what at the moment I'm concerned about is that we're splashing cash everywhere. So we're splashing cash here in Australia to stimulate an economy, and an economy that's been on life support. And it probably could be argued that it's been on life support now for quite a while. But COVID-19 has just smashed it off the life support, and we're sort of grasping for the tubes to put back in to try and keep it going. You know, the government has a saying around putting the economy into hibernation. So putting the economy and ourselves into some sort of sleep-induced state, and then sharing money to anyone that's affected. Now that's worthy, and I'm pleased that they're doing that, but there's a but, and there's a really big but here, a really big but. I don't want to talk about hibernation. I want to talk about reset, because this is our opportunity to reset. And we're seeing this with the sentiment around bringing people into a group in a very short space of time, like a 2-week scenario, saying, buy Australian, buy Australian. The sentiment is there, and that's what we need to be focused on now, building on that sentiment. Because we don't just need a stimulus or a survival package now, we need a recovery package. And we need some advanced understanding of what that recovery package would look like. And my concern is that because we're splashing obscene amounts of money now just to maintain our standard of living, we're not going to have the money that we need when it's time to recover. Because the economy is not just going to wake back up. The economy is not just going to go back to the way it is. Because if we do, we've lost an opportunity to reshape Australia. We really have. We'll have lost an opportunity. And I know, yes, we're talking about some short-term pain. Absolutely. But I think the long-term gain, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that follow us, is where we need to be focused. Not just now, not just maintaining the standard of living that I have now. This is about how do we recover for the best of Australia. And my concern is that there will be nothing in the bottom of the tin when it comes to stimulating or getting our manufacturing base kick-started again. Now, manufacturing's been decimated in this country by a number of things. I don't put the blame on any one thing. There's probably 3 or 4 areas where manufacturing has fallen over. We've got a belief in global free trade, right? Now, that's okay, but I think that belief has been more fostered on our consumerist society more than anything else, right? So we have a belief in global free trade. And it's because we can rely on lower costs of employment, lower compliance costs for businesses in developing countries that maintain a cost of goods that is what we would be prepared to pay as a society. So I believe that 100% that global trade is a little bit of a furphy, because what we're actually talking about is where can I get this stuff made as cheaply as possible so that I can sell as much within a value span within the Australian market. I see a lack of support in required infrastructure to support industries, and I believe that lack of vision from union and wage-related entities, because we've priced ourselves out of those global markets. And I might just add, and so we should, the Australian worker is predominantly a quality worker. So, of course, we should have higher prices, higher wages. But how that works within a global free trade, well, it simply doesn't, because we just go for lowest price. And the last area is our mindset around value. We expect things to cost less than what we do. And we've been used to this for so long. I've been driving Hyundai cars since like 2003 or 2007, sorry. Great value, you get a lot for your money, but that's the problem. That's what my expectation of value is. That can't be driven from an Australian manufacturing base. So we've got things made now from China, Bangladesh, India, And my concern has been for a while, where do we go next? So as we're seeing the rising middle class in China, for example, their prices are starting to rise or will start to rise. And the same that we'll start to see in some of these other little areas. So what happens when there's no developing countries left, right? And then that's the oh shit factor that we're all going to face once again. Oh my God, why is everything suddenly so expensive? So this is something that was coming along, but what we've seen is that COVID has increased the rate of speed on this. And now all of a sudden we've got a manufacturing industry that's sitting there on life support. We've got some real hardy folk out there in the manufacturing industries in Australia. I really take my hat off to you guys. You've got a belief, you've got an unshakable belief that Australians match it with the world. Unfortunately, our society doesn't support you. Our government can be seen as non-supportive. So there's a number of different things sitting in here. So we've got some hardy folk, we've got some resilient folk, and I thank you for that. But now it's our time to support you to try and get our country back. Now, Brookings Research has provided some insight, and I really want to share this insight because there's some fascinating stuff here. Right? They've Brookings Educational Facility Research Company in America did some research around how the US compares to 18 other nations on a manufacturing base. I'm using the US because this is where we get a bit blindsided, I guess, when we think about Australia. The US still has a manufacturing base. And it's really, and mind you, a huge population, 330 million people, of course. But when you look at the top 19 countries, we've got China number 1, US is number 2. Japan's number 3, Germany's number 4, South Korea, India, France, Italy, United Kingdom, Taiwan, and Mexico, right? The interesting thing here, I'm not going to talk about dollar value of the manufacturing industry. I'm just going to mention 2 figures. One is how much of their own domestic needs are met by their manufacturing base, and then 2, how much of the global needs is met by their manufacturing base. Interesting. In China, 27% of their domestic needs are being met by manufacturing. 20% of the global needs is being met by China. 20% of global manufacturing is being met by China. The US, 12% of their domestic needs is being met by their own manufacturing. 18% of the world's. Which indicates that there's some stuff that they're not even supplying, they're just purely exporting. And the same again with potentially with what we see in China is that they're exporting more manufacturing than what they're providing to their own people. In Japan, it's 19% of their own domestic needs are met by their own manufacturing, 10% globally. In Germany, you've got 23% of domestic needs met by the manufacturing base, 7% globally. South Korea is 29% domestically, 4% globally. India, 16% domestically, 3% globally. France, 11% domestically, 3% globally. Italy is 16% domestically, 3% globally. United Kingdom, 10% domestically, 2% globally. Taiwan, 31% domestically, 2% globally. And Mexico is 19% domestic needs met and 2% of the global needs. The bottom of the list of that top 19 or top 20 list is the Netherlands, who are currently looking at 12% of their own domestic needs met by manufacturing and 1% of the global manufacturing. We're not in that list. We're not on that list. We're nowhere to be seen. The Netherlands, sitting at number 19, supplies 1% of the product globally. Number 19. How many countries are there? So who are the fools here? Do we see the problem? So as we weakened our own manufacturing to the point of non-existence or into the niche, other countries have maintained some semblance. But even then, you look at that top 20, and the top 20, number 20, is supplying 1% of the global needs. And the biggest fulfiller of the domestic needs is from Taiwan, who are supplying 31% of domestic needs from their own manufacturing. They're in a much stronger position than most other countries. So who are the fools? So other countries have maintained some sort of semblance in and around manufacturing, right? Now, we've got a major reliance on China, right, for our manufacturing products. As a business consultant, as a business educator, I've sat in on a large number of pitches with angel investors, with funds and whatnot. And every pitch where there is a product to be manufactured is involved. Every time the thoughts will always, whether it's immediately or ultimately during the conversation, will come around to how cheaply can we get this made in China. It's just what we do. So let's look at some more figures. And I don't want this to be like a figures show, but these figures are really relevant. So when we look at employment in manufacturing, now I've listed up the top 10. And for interest, 10% of Americans are employed in some way, shape, or form around in the manufacturing industries. Once again, Australia does not even get a mention here. So when you're going through the countries, we've got Poland, 20% of their employment is manufacturing. In Germany, it's 19%. In Italy, it's 18.5%. In Turkey, it's 18.1%. In South Korea, it's 16.9%. In China, it is 16.9%. I'm just going to place that link for all these figures in the chat, and you'll be able to check this out for yourself. In China, it's 16.9%. In Japan, it's 16.9%. In Mexico, it's 16.3%. In Russia, it's 14.4%. And in Indonesia, 13.5%. And hopefully, you would have seen that some of those countries weren't listed in the top 20 in the volume or the percentages of global output in manufacturing. So, where is Australia? We're nowhere to be seen. Interestingly, when you look at domestic employment with manufacturing, and this is where we've suffered from since the 70s, right? And this is why the Australian-made sentiment is fantastic, but this is not a thing that I'm going to buy a candle that's manufactured by some little lady in a town in New South Wales country, and I'm suddenly going to solve the problem. No. I've got the wrong figures in front of me here. So when you talk about, say, just bear with me, I do apologize. I thought I had this figure down, but I don't. So when you're looking at developed countries, right, what they call developed countries, so US, Europe, Japan, Australia. So they've lumped us all in together, which is, but you'll see a trend. In 1970, 26.8% of our employment was people that were employed in manufacturing. So 26.8 in 1970. Now, over the decades, 1980, it was 23.9, so we dropped 3%. In 1990, 20.7, we dropped 3%. In 2000, 16.9, we dropped 3%. 2007, 14.3%. And in 2011, the amount of people employed in manufacturing in developed countries was 12%. 26.8% in 1970, 12.8% in 2011. Conversely, in East Asia, which is China and South Korea predominantly, in 1970, 13.9%. A massive increase to 1980 where it was 22.5%, and it now sits around the same. It's about 21% in 2011. You look at Southeast Asia, which is Indonesia and the Philippines, 11% in 1970, 15% now. And you look at India at 9% in 1970 and 11.6% now. So you've seen the shift. The developed world has seen a drop-off as we've got used to or accustomed to seeing manufactured develop in developing countries. Our manufacturing employment base has dropped off incredibly. And during that time, can I just say, China went from number 5 in the world to number 1. So what should happen? So I'm not just here talking about the problems. Let's talk about some of the things that I potentially see that can really help us. First up, we need to get some tax incentives. Now, I am not a fan of industry bailouts. So that is the first thing I'm going to say. We saw a shitload of money given to the automobile industry, whether it was Holden or Ford. They both got more money than they probably deserved. And what happened to that money? It wasn't to create a sustainable operation. I've got no idea. Whether they just banked it as profits, good on them, well done, they're gone now. But I'm not a fan of industry bailouts from the government because I don't think that money gets used at all well. We do need tax incentives. We do need tax incentives on startups and infrastructure costs. That's one of the first things that I would see, trying to help businesses in respect of startup. We need to have payroll incentives. The larger the workforce, the better the incentives. Now, in saying that, we've got a dual-pronged thing here because we must embrace technology. We must embrace innovation. We must embrace robotics. We must embrace automations. But we also need people to be employed. So the more people that a manufacturing company employs, the greater the incentive should be on their payroll. We don't want industry bailouts. I've mentioned that. We should have access through, government mentoring programs for industry's world's best practice, global experts to mentor and provide business support to help build this manufacturing base that we've allowed ourselves to decimate. Now, most of these people are actually sitting here in Australia now. I'm not saying all of them, but most of them. We've got some pretty intelligent people sitting here who can work through this problem and start to build this base. And this is why I'm concerned that because of all the money that's going out there now to keep our standard of living, are we really going to have anything left for us to rebuild with? Because we need to rebuild in this particular industry. We've got some amazingly smart people. So the government should be focused on tax incentives, payroll incentives, so they, the better the company does in terms of, productivity, profitability, employment, the greater the incentive that they have, right? As well as having some level of incentive for research and development and startup costs. Now, from the general population, we need to shift. And we need to shift from a consumerism point of view to one of pride, because I see that. Once again, when I think back to Japan, there are a number of people in jobs, roles, employment that we just wouldn't have here in Australia. The amount of cleaners was amazing. Now, whether that was an increase with COVID, I'm not sure. But we also saw car park attendants just standing next to a boom gate welcoming people in. We just saw, store attendants. You walk into a store in Japan and their numbers in the store would have been 3 to 4 times employees than what you would see in a similar sized Australian business. So there is a national pride and there is a national focus on keeping people purposeful. So whether they've got incentives, I'm not sure of that, but, ultimately they want to give people a purpose. They want to give people a meaningful life. The amount of homeless that I saw in Japan or in Tokyo was vastly less than what you would see in a US city, for example, or even here in Brisbane. So our mindset needs to shift. We've got to move from one of consumerism to one of pride. we're seeing that pride now. The pride, if we didn't have the pride, we wouldn't see the groups that we're seeing. 1 million people in an Australian-made group, fantastic. That's great pride. Don't lose sight of it. And don't join that group just to punish China. We're the ones that created this. The Australians have created our over-reliance on China, no one else. The pride needs to be sustained. And it needs to be sustained even when we walk into a shop and we say, wow, doesn't that cost a lot of money? Yes, but it's Australian. It's quality. Let's stop being seduced by the lowest price. Let's stop being seduced by the need or the belief that we need to live an easy life. Let's set ourselves up and let's set our country up for some level of success moving forward. Let's stop being reliant on developing countries to manufacture the products that we consume. Let's start thinking about what we can do ourselves. And just my final thought, let's not fall into hibernation. Let's reset. I'm Tony Curl from Think and Grow Business. I hope you've taken some value, some insight, some opinion around what I've just spoken about. I'll talk again real soon.